You never expect to look at your own children and feel doubt creep in like an unwanted shadow. But that's where my story starts. I spent 10 years married to Sarah. We built what everyone around us thought was the perfect family. A house in a quiet North Carolina neighborhood, 2 kids, stable jobs. From the outside, it looked picture perfect, and for a long time, I believed it too. But then little cracks started to appear. Cracks that grew wider every year until they split everything open. This is the story of how I discovered the 2 kids I raised weren't biologically mine, why I stayed quiet for years before acting, and how I built a plan so my entire future wouldn't be destroyed the second I filed for divorce. When Michael Jr. was born, I was 29. I just started solidifying my IT career, and becoming a dad felt like the greatest accomplishment of my life. 2 years later, Samantha arrived, and I remember standing in the hospital room thinking, this is it. This is everything I ever wanted. I changed diapers, rocked them to sleep, and spent every weekend building forts or kicking a soccer ball in the yard. They were my pride. No one could have told me otherwise back then. But as they grew, I couldn't ignore the gnawing thought. They don't look like me. I've got dark hair and brown eyes, same as my brother and my father. Sarah is blonde, blue-eyed, fair-skinned. When Michael Jr. was a toddler, I brushed off the fact that he looked nothing like me. People joked, well, he's his mother's twin, and I'd laugh because what else could I do? But when Samantha came along and looked the same, light features, small nose, eyes that mirrored Sarah's but not mine, I started feeling that quiet dread in my chest. At family gatherings, relatives would make offhand comments, wow, those kids are pure Sarah, not a drop of Mike in them. Everyone thought it was harmless. To me, it was a knife wrapped in a smile. By the time Michael Jr. was 9 and Samantha was 7, the differences were glaring. Their personalities, their features, even the way strangers reacted. People would ask Sarah if the kids were both hers, but rarely anyone asked about me. It got to the point where I couldn't sit in silence anymore. But I also knew confronting Sarah directly was dangerous. I'd read enough stories to know that tipping my hand too soon could ruin me if divorce ever came. So I kept my mouth shut and started doing quiet research. It started with late-night Google searches. How accurate are DNA tests? Do fathers ever discover kids aren't theirs? What happens in divorce if kids aren't biological? The rabbit hole was endless. I discovered something chilling. Where I lived, even if I wasn't the biological father, I'd still be on the hook for child support because I'd been the presumed father on their birth certificates. Courts didn't care about biology. They cared about who raised the kids. I read story after story of men bankrupted by child support for kids proven not to be theirs. Some men fought it for years and lost. That's when I realized if this suspicion turned out to be true, I couldn't just storm into the living room and scream at Sarah. I had to be smart. One afternoon, when Sarah took the kids to her mom's for the weekend, I ordered at-home DNA kits. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, that I'd feel stupid and guilty once I confirmed they were mine. But deep down, I already knew. When the results came in, I locked myself in the office to open them. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. Michael Jr., not a match. Samantha, not a match. Both. Neither child biologically mine. The air left my lungs. I sat in silence, staring at the papers while my world collapsed around me. For hours, I couldn't move. Every memory, their first steps, their birthday parties, every time they called me daddy, suddenly felt stolen. But I didn't rage. I didn't confront Sarah. I forced myself to breathe, forced myself to file the results away in a drawer, and told myself, don't be reckless. You need a plan. That night, Sarah came home like nothing had changed. She laughed with the kids, kissed me on the cheek, asked about dinner. I stood there numb, realizing I was living in a play where everyone but me was improvising. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. Inside, I was already planning my exit. I knew I couldn't divorce her right away. With my current IT salary, I'd be crushed under alimony and child support. And with those DNA results technically unofficial, at-home kits didn't always stand in court, I couldn't wave them like a smoking gun. So I decided to do something that felt insane at the time. I'd intentionally lower my income. 2 months later, I quit my IT job and took a warehouse position. The pay was nearly half of what I used to make, but the job was steady. physically exhausting, but predictable. Sarah wasn't thrilled, but I gave her an excuse she could swallow. I was burned out. The IT world was killing me. I needed something simple for my sanity. She bought it. She told friends I'd changed, but was trying to find myself. I let her build whatever narrative she wanted because it kept her from suspecting the truth. Meanwhile, I was quietly documenting everything: bank statements, pay stubs, work schedules. If divorce came, I needed 2 solid years of reduced income to establish a pattern. Those 2 years were hell. On the surface, we looked like a family going through a rough patch. Sarah told people I'd become distant, that I wasn't the same man she married. I let her. It built her case for divorce, not mine. But inside, I was dying. Every time Michael Jr. called me dad, I wanted to break down. Every time Samantha hugged me goodnight, I felt guilt eat away at me. I loved them. God, I loved them. But every moment was tainted by that paper in my drawer. The truth I couldn't share. 2 years later, when Michael Jr. was 11 and Samantha was 9, I repeated the process. Another DNA test, this time a legally valid one through a clinic. I needed undeniable proof if this ever went to court. The results were the same. Neither child was mine. Reading it the second time didn't make it easier. If anything, it broke me more, because it confirmed what I'd known but hadn't allowed myself to fully accept. My marriage wasn't real. My kids, though I loved them, weren't mine in the way I thought. Shortly after the second test, Sarah sat me down. She had that tone, rehearsed but firm. "Michael," she said, "this isn't working anymore. You've changed. You don't look at me the same. You're distant with the kids. I don't feel loved." It was everything I had expected and prepared for. She thought she was the one pulling the trigger, but really, I'd been waiting for this moment for 2 years. I nodded. "Maybe you're right." She blinked, surprised by how calm I was. Inside, I was screaming, but outside, I gave her exactly what she needed: an easy out. The divorce process began. Sarah played her role. Telling people I'd become a different man meant that she couldn't recognize me anymore. And I played mine, quiet, tired, resigned. She didn't know I had the DNA results tucked away, ready for when the court tried to decide custody and child support. She didn't know I'd spent 2 years preparing financially to minimize the damage. All she saw was a man who had changed. And she wasn't wrong. Because the truth is, I had changed. The moment I saw those first results, I was never the same again. People always think the divorce is the finish line. Papers get signed, you move out, you split the assets, and life just moves on. But when kids are involved, especially kids who aren't biologically yours, it isn't a clean break. It's a war that keeps bleeding you dry, emotionally and financially, long after the ink dries. That was my reality. When the divorce hit the courtroom, I thought maybe, just maybe, the truth would set me free. I had the DNA tests. Legitimate, court-admissible ones that left no room for doubt. Michael Jr. and Samantha were not mine, but the judge barely blinked. He looked at the papers, acknowledged them, and then said words that burned themselves into my brain forever. "Mr. Turner, while it is clear the children are not biologically yours, the court recognizes you as the presumed father under the law. You have been in their lives since birth, and for their stability, the court will require child support." Stability. That's what he called it. Stability for them, ruin for me. I walked out of that courtroom owing child support for kids who didn't share a single drop of my DNA, all while Sarah walked away with half the assets and her smug composure. She didn't even flinch when the DNA was read into record. Not once. Sarah's official reasoning for divorce was as rehearsed as a script. He changed. He stopped loving me. He wasn't the man I married. And she wasn't wrong. I had changed, but not because I wanted to, because she made me. She built her whole case around the idea that I was the reason the marriage collapsed. Friends of hers believed her instantly. Even some of my own acquaintances looked at me with suspicion, as if I'd had some midlife crisis and abandoned my family. The irony was sickening. She was the one who lied for a decade, yet I was branded the husband who fell out of love. I never got a straight answer about the real father. In the weeks after the divorce was finalized, when we were still sorting out logistics, I tried once. Calmly. "Sarah," I asked one afternoon while exchanging the kids, "just tell me one thing. Who's their real father?" She froze, her eyes narrowing like I'd just accused her of murder. "That doesn't matter. You're their father. That's all that matters. I pressed again, softer this time. I deserve to know. Her lips tightened. Drop it, Michael. And that was the end of it. I realized then that she would never tell me. Maybe she didn't know herself. Maybe it was someone close, or maybe she just didn't care enough to answer. Whatever the case, I was left with a hole in my chest and questions that would never be answered. At first, I still saw Michael Jr. and Samantha regularly. Court orders required visitation, and I loved them too much to simply disappear. But the weight of everything started breaking me down. Every time they hugged me, every time they said Dad, I felt this jagged split inside me. Love on one side, betrayal on the other. I started pulling away. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just little by little. Canceling visits here and there, saying I was working overtime, showing up late. It wasn't because I didn't love them. God, I loved those kids. But I was broken. I couldn't reconcile the fact that they weren't mine, that I was paying thousands I didn't have to support Sarah's lies, and that society didn't care about the truth. I told myself that maybe the healthiest thing, for me and for them, was distance. Let Sarah raise them. Let her deal with the consequences of her lies. During that time, I became vocal about one thing: DNA testing at birth. I'd talk to friends, coworkers, anyone who'd listen. If DNA testing was mandatory in hospitals, this wouldn't happen, I'd argue. Men deserve to know the truth from day one. Women who oppose it are usually the ones with something to hide. Some agreed. Others said I was bitter, that I should just move on. Sarah's defenders painted me as resentful, a man who couldn't handle divorce. But I knew better. I wasn't just bitter. I was ruined by a system that valued lies over truth. As the years passed, Michael Jr. and Samantha grew. Photos would come in from school events, updates from Sarah during custody exchanges. I'd nod and smile, but inside, I was detached. I went to fewer events, stopped volunteering at their school, stopped being the all-in dad I once was. I told myself it was for survival. If I stayed too close, I'd never heal. But the guilt was suffocating. On quiet nights, I'd look at old photos. Me holding Michael Jr. on my shoulders at the zoo, Samantha falling asleep on my chest after a long day, and I'd feel the weight of everything I'd lost. Not just them, but the version of myself that believed in my family. From what I heard through the grapevine, Sarah's life wasn't picture perfect after the divorce. The shine wore off. Relationships came and went. People whispered about fights she had with boyfriends, about how complicated things got with the kids. I didn't take joy in it. Honestly, I barely felt anything. My anger had burned itself out. What was left was a quiet emptiness, the kind that follows you like a shadow. Around the time Michael Jr. turned 15, I noticed a shift. The kids weren't just visiting because the court said so. They started asking more pointed questions. Dad, why did you and Mom really split up? Dad, why don't you come around as much? Dad, is Mom telling us the truth? Their eyes held something I hadn't seen before. Doubt. The same doubt that had once eaten me alive. I never badmouthed Sarah. As much as I hated her, I couldn't poison them against their own mother. I'd deflect, keep it vague. Sometimes grown-ups just don't work out. But they weren't satisfied with that forever. By the end of that period, I was at my lowest point. I'd convinced myself that walking away was the only way to survive, that by creating distance, I could rebuild my life and stop bleeding out emotionally. I didn't know then that the story wasn't over, that Michael Jr. and Samantha would eventually grow up, see through Sarah's lies, and come back to me on their own. Back then, all I knew was that I was broken. I was paying for a crime I didn't commit, and the only way to keep myself from drowning was to let go, at least for a while. When I first walked away, I thought that was the end of my story with Michael Jr. and Samantha. I told myself they'd grow up in Sarah's world, believe whatever she told them, and eventually I'd fade into the background like a distant uncle. But life has a way of surprising you, even after it's broken you. When the kids hit their teenage years, the questions got sharper. Michael Jr. was 15, Samantha 13, when they started pressing me harder during visits. Dad, why do you always act like you're walking on eggshells? Michael Jr. asked one night after dinner. Dad, why don't you fight with Mom when she says things about you? Samantha added quietly. I didn't know what Sarah was saying to them, but I had a good guess. Probably that I was cold, unloving, that I abandoned her. She was always careful with her lies, enough truth mixed in to sound convincing. But teenagers aren't dumb. They can smell when something doesn't add up. By the time Michael Jr. turned 16, he wasn't just suspicious, he was angry. He'd call me late at night, his voice shaking. Mom says you left because you didn't love her anymore, but that doesn't explain why you left us too. That doesn't explain why you look so miserable every time we're with you. It was the hardest line to walk. I wanted to tell him everything, but I still couldn't bring myself to use them as weapons against Sarah. I'd always believed kids deserved to love both their parents without being poisoned. So I'd deflect. Sometimes adults make mistakes. Sometimes we can't fix them. But those half answers only fueled his frustration. He knew there was more, and every vague response from me only widened the rift between him and his mother. It wasn't me who finally cracked. It was Sarah. One evening during an exchange, Samantha whispered to me as she buckled her seatbelt, "Mom said you only take care of us because the court makes you. She said we're not even yours." I froze. My hands clenched the steering wheel so hard I thought it might snap. Sarah had told them. Or maybe slipped during an argument. Either way, the secret was out. I pulled over a few blocks later, turned to face both kids, and said the words I'd been dreading for years. Listen to me. No matter what anyone says, I am your dad. I've been your dad since the day you were born. I love you. That doesn't change. Michael Jr. stared at me, jaw tight. But is it true? Are you really not our biological dad? The silence after that question felt like an eternity. Finally, I nodded. It's true, but it doesn't change how I feel about you. It never will. Samantha burst into tears. Michael Jr. sat stone-faced, anger radiating off him like heat. And in that moment, I hated Sarah more than I ever had before. Not for cheating, not for lying to me, but for dragging the kids into her mess. From that point on, everything changed. Michael Jr. and Samantha started pulling away from their mother. They'd complain about her rules, her manipulations, her excuses. They'd call me late at night just to vent. "Mom keeps saying you're not our dad, but you are. You're the only dad we've ever had," Samantha said through tears one evening. "Mom's the liar, not you," Michael Jr. added with venom. I never encouraged their anger toward her, but I couldn't stop them either. They were old enough now to see through her stories. And once kids see the cracks in their parents' masks, they can't unsee them. Over time, our relationship began to heal. At first, it was awkward, like we were all tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. But slowly, they stopped bringing up biology and started focusing on what really mattered. We built new traditions. Movie nights at my place. Sunday morning breakfasts where Samantha insisted on making pancakes, even if they were half raw in the middle. Michael Jr. helping me fix the old car in my garage, even though we argued about tools constantly. It wasn't the same as when they were little, when I'd carry them on my shoulders or rock them to sleep. But it was real. It was ours. And it reminded me that fatherhood was never just about DNA. It was about being there, about showing up, even when you're broken. Meanwhile, Sarah's world got smaller. The kids started spending more time with me by choice, not just court order. She'd call and demand they come home, and they'd refuse. Arguments in her house got louder, uglier. Eventually, Michael Jr. told me, "I can't stand living there anymore. I want to stay with you." Samantha followed soon after. We didn't go through court to change custody. They were old enough to make their own choices, and Sarah couldn't force them without making things worse. By the time they were both in college, their relationship with her was fractured almost beyond repair. They saw her occasionally, but the resentment never left. Now that years have passed, I look back and see the whole arc of it. The suspicion, the pain, the betrayal, the walking away, and the return. Do I still wish things had been different? Absolutely. If hospitals required DNA testing at birth, none of this would have happened. Men wouldn't be trapped paying for lies. Kids wouldn't grow up confused about their identities. Families wouldn't be built on secrets. But despite all the pain, I can say this: I am blessed. Michael Jr. and Samantha aren't my biological kids, but they are mine in every way that matters. They chose me. Out of all the chaos Sarah created, they looked at me and said, "You're dad." And that's something no DNA test can take away. If there's one thing I want other men to take from my story, it's this: get the DNA test. Not because you don't love your partner, but because it protects you from living a nightmare. Women who oppose it usually have something to lose. But beyond that, I've learned something else too. Biology isn't everything. Love is. And while Sarah gave me betrayal, Michael Jr., and Samantha gave me something much stronger, they gave me proof that being a father isn't written in your blood. It's written in your kids' hearts. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed, please like, share, and subscribe for more content. If you want to share your stories, please comment below. Additionally, what is your opinion on the poster's decision?